Good evening, ladies and gents. How you doing? This is going to be like an episode of Crime Watch today because every time I found a story that I thought would be good to cover, I stumbled into another one. Essentially because you're living in Babylon. The UK has turned into some sort of lawless, degenerate society, probably as a result of the fact they only prosecute people who've got the wrong opinions. So, the real criminals, they know it's party time. It's like the plot of Die Hard with a Vengeance when that kid says to the copper, "Look around, you could rob Fort Knox." That's what the UK's doing. They know the bobbies are too busy looking into you for mean tweets. So it's party time if you wanna, melt someone's lips off. Man held after acid attack on girl outside school. Yeah, I'll give you one guess where we think this fella hails from. Because contrary to Hope Not Hate boss Nick Lowell's, in the 1950s, Englishmen weren't routinely Simon Westernising all the women that knocked them back on a marriage proposal. Funny old thing, that's something that we've imported in recent years, and you probably remember Nick Lowes did tweet that and spread it around social media, saying it was carried out by a bloke who looked like me from my hometown. And when it turned out to be a complete lie because he's mentally ill, and anybody who's ever read a book is fully aware that working class English lads from Yorkshire don't generally turn a woman's face into a modern art masterpiece just because they don't want to marry them. But obviously he didn't get in any trouble for that. Anyway, I'm rambling. Before I start reading the story, I'll just quickly mention the other one I was going to cover, purely for the simple reason that it proved that the BBC's DEI policies means that they're now hiring people that can't even write. Both Paz and myself shared this headline, which the BBC quickly deleted, because the original one didn't say teacher stabbed by pupil, thought she was going to die. The original one said teachers stabbed by pupil thought they was going to die. Yeah, so they sacked Hugh Edwards, who, fair enough, he might be a galloping pedo, but at least he could read and write properly. And they replaced him with Snoop Doggy Dogg, looks like. Okay, let's get into the news. There's a couple to cover because you're living in a dystopian hellscape. Just as I predicted years ago, I told you this is the way it's going to go. It's got to get much, much, much worse before it gets better because the normies aren't going to switch on until it essentially is the plot of a dystopian science fiction movie. And every single time your granny tries to nip outside the house for a walk, she either gets mugged, robbed, or, in the worst case scenario, folded over a park bench and banged more than Stevie Wonder's big toe by a big Rastafarian gentleman. So, that's where it's headed, as I keep telling you. Buckle up, alright? But let's do some news, just out of morbid curiosity. Man held after acid attack on girl outside school. A 35-year-old man has been arrested after a suspected acid attack on a girl outside a school in West London. Just a man. That's all they know about him. Could have been a milkman or a postman. But we all know, if he looked like me, a handsome, blue-eyed devil with cheekbones you could hang your jacket off. If he looked like me, there'd already be a photo of him and there'd be proudly emblazoning his name. Paul Smith melted someone's lips off. But unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, people with names like Paul Smith don't generally melt people's lips off. So as usual, they'll be a little bit light on details. They'll tell you what dress she was wearing, they'll tell you that she liked Taylor Swift, but they won't tell you what ideology drives people to leave innocent young women and girls with a face like a half-chewed Highland toffee. Tegan McFarlane remains in hospital with potentially life-changing injuries and has undergone surgery. A 16-year-old boy was also injured, and a staff member was hurt trying to help them. The Met Police said the man was arrested on suspicion of causing grievous bodily harm and remains in custody. Detectives said a lone man threw a substance at the teenagers before fleeing on an electric scooter. So Peter Hitchens was right. Electric scooters are a bad idea because they're quite dangerous and they also facilitate melting people's faces off. Because it's not going to be the man's fault, is it? It's not going to be like his religious ideology or his cultural norms. No, it's the scooter's fault. So ban them as well. Corey McFarlane said words could not express the shock, pain and trauma his daughter is going through. Well, I'll tell you his name as well, won't they? The boy was treated at hospital and has been allowed home. Mr. McFarlane said Tegan's injuries are not life-threatening, but it's still early days. And he said his family's going to be leaving the area. He thanked the public for donations, and he said it'll help relocate the family. And I don't want to hear anybody complaining about white flight, right? White flight? I wouldn't just fly the family away. If I was surrounded by people who think it's perfectly reasonable, again, because of cultural norms, it's to do with dowries and caste systems and all sorts of things that we don't do in England, which is why nobody ever ended up with a head like a melted Wellington boot in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, when, funny old thing, we hadn't imported millions and millions of scary, hairy blokes with big swinging ball sacks and very, very low IQs. He added the attack deeply affected his daughter's mental health and she doesn't want to go back to school, obviously, and he wants the 14-year-old to continue her GCSEs with a private tutor. Scott Ware said, "We're aware of the concerns raised by the community and questions that are being asked about the circumstances surrounding the incident. We will maintain a police presence outside the school, and that's your lot." That's your lot. BBC doesn't ask any questions. Why do people do acid attacks? Who did it? What does he look like? What's he called? Well, I'll give you some straws in the wind, shall I? Because there was quite a big incident involving this a few months ago, and the BBC's memory hold it, and they didn't bring it up here, even though it's very pertinent. So I'll do it for you, shall I? You may remember this fella. He doesn't have a black eye. No, that's just a chemical burn because he too was engaging in a bit of cultural enrichment via the medium of cleaning fluids. Yeah, splendid gentleman. And he wasn't called Alan Jones or Roger Taylor. No, he was called, well, YouTube doesn't like it if you pronounce names like that, so I'll just highlight it for you there, and you can read it for yourself. I mean, that works, doesn't it? I'm confident everybody who watches my channel can actually read and write properly, unlike the people that were importing in their millions. And remember, just to verify what I was talking about earlier, Hope Not Hate boss Nick Lowles accused a white working class lad from my hometown of throwing acid in the face of a regular at Alan's marvellous snack bar. And it was a pure, total fiction, 100% projection, because that's not something that chavvy lads from Teesside tend to do to people. Why do they do it? Well, we all know why they do it. We all know why it happens. We all know why it didn't happen in the 50s and the 60s. And we all know why it happens now. But for those of you that don't pay any attention at all, I'll give you the Cliff Notes version, shall I? This is from actionaid.org, a well-known charity. Sorry, did I say charity? I meant this is from Nick Griffin's vile, fascistic website. Yeah, of course it is. It must be. Because they're talking about FGM and sexual assault and other things that are imported from abroad. So yeah, make sure you do not give any money to actionaid.org, despite the fact they help hundreds of thousands of women all around the world. Yeah, that's how it works. It's 2024. Keep up. Anyway, acid attacks. They are perpetuated against women and girls as a means to permanently scar the survivors. They are used because so much bearing is placed on the physical appearance of women and girls, and the greatest prevalence of them is in South Asian countries including India, Pakistan and Bangladesh. The most common reasons for these attacks are the refusal of marriage, the denial of sex, or the rejection of men and boys. It is an expression of control over women and girls' bodies, and in Bangladesh there have been thousands of acid attacks over the last few years. Her disfigurement then becomes a public mark of shame, making it hard for her to get married or gain employment. Can you believe that? This is what I'm talking about. Not all cultures are equal. The Bootneck is not prejudiced or bigoted in any way, thanks to a childhood doing what all poor working class northern lads do, something that the middle class arseholes who read The Guardian or work at the BBC don't do, which is actually live alongside recent immigrants and help them integrate their children. It's us that play football with them in primary school. It's us that teach them the local lingo. And it's us, to our eternal shame, that get little Indian kids like my friend Neil to support Middlesbrough Football Club, so he's got to be depressed for the rest of his adult life. Like, did you see that Celtic fan who got arrested by the German police because he had a Palestine flag? He was crying about it on Twitter. They did him a favour, beating him up and locking him in the cell for 4 hours because he missed the game. But I digress. It's us, the people that get slurred and smeared by the middle class wankers. It's us that spend time and socialise with recent immigrants. Not them. They live in light leafy shires where they don't see any of these people. None of them camped out on Frau Merkel's lawn when she invited 8 million of them in. But a few 100,000 moved to Middlesbrough. Anyway, don't start me off on that tangent because that'll be another 10-minute rant. Let's finish the story. We're on the home straight. That is disgraceful and despicable. Nobody had anything but empathy and sympathy for someone like Simon Weston when he came home from the Falklands disfigured. And we'd be the same with any woman or girl that has to live through an attack like this from a monster, because we're raised with compassion and empathy. I like to think that if someone melted my missus' face off with battery acid, it wouldn't make a blind bit of difference. In fact, I know I wouldn't. I wouldn't leave her. And I don't think anybody would mistreat her as a result of it, because we're not savages. But it makes me angry just talking about it. So let's just sum up, shall we? And I haven't even got time to do the original story that the BBC deleted, which was 2 teachers and several students getting knifed, doubtless by another fine imbiber of wonderful cultural enrichment. To sum up, Nick Laws should be in prison if we apply the same standards that the legal activists, I'm not calling them legal professionals, professional activists applied to the hundreds of white working class people that were recently arrested and sent to prison, including Mr. Mellier, who got 2 years for stickers. Yeah, so Mr. Laws would be in prison if he had the wrong political opinions, because that's the country you're living in now. Secondly, we all know where acid attacks come from, who does them, and why they do them. It's in black and white on a charity website. I'll put a link in the description. You can go and read it yourself. And finally, can we just acknowledge that the law in the UK is a joke? Coppers shouldn't be policing Twitter and locking people up for saying impolite things about boats arriving at Dover. What they should be doing is locking scumbags up for 20 years a pop if they throw corrosive substances in women's faces. Alright? Seems straightforward to me, but what do I know? I'm not a highly paid middle-class arsehole who works for the BBC. Oh yeah, and fourthly, the BBC is a national disgrace. Didn't tell you his name, didn't show you his face, and definitely didn't go near the reason why acid attacks occur or what culture they were imported from with a 50-foot pole. Because they're an embarrassment, and at this point they are complicit in the grooming, the torture, the abuse, and sometimes the murder of young English women and girls by violent foreign men. The BBC and the British government and the police and the judges, they are complicit. So it's going to keep getting worse, as I keep telling you, and it's just going to go on for years. And then finally, you're going to have total collapse. And there is going to be violent retribution from all the people affected by it. And as I've said many times, this is why I try to run a humorous channel. You've got to try and keep your wits about you and not go down the rabbit hole of getting aggressive about this stuff. But Michael Howard made this point 20 years ago. Michael Howard said, if you don't listen to the reasonable concerns of normal, middle-of-the-road, working-class people, the masses, if you don't listen to their reasonable concerns about crime and punishment and immigration and public safety, you are just creating the next generation of full-blown extremists. So when it comes, please don't look at me and say the guy making the comedy videos on YouTube's the cause of all this. If you want to see what caused it all, face the mirror, all right? Mr. Starmer, Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak, the Director General, the Guardian journalists, the judges and the lawyers and everybody at the College of Policing, face the mirror, because you caused it, all right? That's me for the day, ladies and gentlemen. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you are pro-face melting because you hail from the foothills of Afghanistan, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear a rationale for that. I'm sure someone will be able to come up with one. In fact, Owen Jones will probably do it. Owen Jones would slag it off until he saw a picture of the blokes that do it, and then he'd instantly be on side. He'd be like, oh, technically a melted face can be enriching. Yes. That's the way he works. These people have got a blind spot that makes them mentally delusional. I can't explain it because I'm normal, but it's there. Oh, it's definitely there. All right. Thanks for tuning in. See you all tomorrow. Take it easy. Toodle pip. Cheers.